In a small town in Ohio, there's a woman who spent 34 years working the same job at a public library. Her final salary, the highest she ever earned in her life, was $58,000 a year. She never got a raise that made headlines. She never picked a stock that tripled overnight. She never inherited a dime. And when she retired at 66, her retirement account held just over $1.4 million. Somewhere, right now, a surgeon making $400,000 a year is stressed about money. A lawyer earning $750,000 is still living paycheck to paycheck. And a librarian who never cracked $60,000 retired with more than both of them combined. How is that possible? The answer has almost nothing to do with income. And it has almost everything to do with a set of quiet, unremarkable habits. Habits so boring that almost nobody bothers to talk about them. This is the story of how boring wins. To understand it, you first have to sit with a question economists have quietly obsessed over for decades. Why do so many high earners end up with so little? And why do so many modest earners end up with so much? In the 1990s, two researchers went looking for millionaires across America. They expected gated mansions, European cars, expensive watches. Instead, they found something strange. Most of the millionaires they studied didn't look wealthy at all. Ordinary cars, ordinary homes. Many of them had modest, blue-collar or middle-class jobs. One of the wealthiest men they interviewed still bought his suits off the clearance rack. Meanwhile, many of the highest earners they studied, doctors, executives, entertainers, had almost nothing saved. Big incomes, big houses, big car payments, and almost nothing left over at the end of each month. The researchers gave this a name, stealth wealth. But the real discovery wasn't about stealth. It was about something far more uncomfortable. Income and wealth are not the same thing. They are barely even related. There's a separate piece of evidence that makes this even stranger. A few years ago, a major investment firm quietly reviewed which of its client accounts had performed the best over the previous decade. Not the wealthiest clients, not the most active traders. The best performing accounts, dollar for dollar. The answer surprised even the analysts running the study. The best performing accounts belonged to people who had forgotten they had one. Some were dead. Their heirs simply hadn't reallocated the assets yet. Others had opened the account, walked away, and never checked it again. Nobody was managing the money. Nobody was reacting to the news. Nobody was panicking during a downturn or getting greedy during a boom. The absence of a decision turned out to be the best decision of all. Here is where one particular story actually begins. Not with a plan, but with an accident. It's 1989. A 22-year-old walks into a public library on her first day of work, making just under $14,000 a year. There's a stack of new hire paperwork on the break room table, and somewhere in the middle of it, a single form asking whether she'd like to contribute to a retirement plan. She almost skips it. It feels irrelevant. Retirement is a lifetime away, and $14,000 doesn't leave much room for anything beyond rent and groceries. An older coworker, close to retirement herself, leans over and says something almost in passing. Whatever you do, put something into that plan. Even if it's nothing. Just start. There's no financial philosophy behind the advice, no investment books, no grand ambition for wealth. Just a form, a pen, and a box checked for 3%. She signs it, mostly because someone she trusted told her to, and forgets about it by the following week. That single decision, made in about 10 minutes, in the first month of a new job, would end up being worth more than every raise she earned for the rest of her 34-year career combined. Not because the amount was large, because it was automatic, and because it never stopped. Here's the central question underneath all of this. If income isn't the deciding factor in wealth, what is? The answer lives inside a mathematical idea so simple that most people dismiss it before they truly understand it: compound growth. Albert Einstein reportedly called compound interest the most powerful force in the universe. Whether or not he actually said it, the sentiment holds up. Money that grows on top of money that already grew creates a curve, not a line. Picture a snowball at the top of a long hill. In the first few rotations, it barely changes size. It looks almost the same as when it started rolling. This is the most dangerous part of the entire process, because it's exactly where almost everyone quits. The growth stays invisible for far longer than anyone expects. And then, without warning, it isn't. 10 years pass at the library. It's 1999. Her contributions, added up paycheck by paycheck, come to a little over $11,000. The account balance? About $18,000. She checks it once, on a slow afternoon at the front desk, printing the statement on the library's own machine because she doesn't own a home computer yet. She feels something close to disappointment. $18,000, after a decade of quiet sacrifice, looks small next to what her coworkers are spending on vacations, new furniture, newer cars. One coworker, a few desks over, has just leased a car that costs more per month than she's contributed to her account all year. Another is talking about a hot stock a brother-in-law swears is about to take off. For a moment, she considers stopping, just for a while, just until things feel less tight. She even mentions it out loud to the same older coworker who first told her to sign up, 10 years earlier. The woman just shrugs and says the same thing she'd said before. Leave it alone. She doesn't stop. Not out of some rare discipline. She simply doesn't get around to filling out the form to change it, and by the time she thinks of it again, the moment has passed, and 3% is still quietly leaving her paycheck before she ever sees it. That's the part most documentaries skip, because it isn't exciting. But it's the most important part. For most of the journey, compounding feels like nothing is happening at all. There's a name for the discomfort in that moment. Economists call it temporal discounting, our built-in preference for a smaller reward now over a larger one later, especially when later feels abstract and impossibly far away. It's the same instinct that makes $18,000 feel like failure, when it's actually the quiet foundation of everything still to come. The tragedy is that it was working. It just hadn't become visible yet. This is where we have to challenge a belief most people carry without ever questioning it. The belief that wealth is built through big decisions. We imagine wealthy people making one brilliant move. The right stock, the right business, the right timing, a single dramatic turning point like the climax of a movie. But for most financially secure retirees in America, wealth isn't built from one decision. It's built from thousands of small decisions that never got made. The raise that didn't turn into a bigger car payment, the bonus that didn't become a bigger house, the hot stock tip from a coworker that was politely ignored. Researchers call the opposite of this lifestyle creep, spending that rises in lockstep with income, quietly absorbing every raise before it can be saved. It's rarely one reckless purchase. It's a slightly nicer car here, a slightly bigger house there, each one reasonable on its own, until the entire raise has vanished into a slightly upgraded version of the same life. There's a particular kind of pressure behind this that rarely gets named. Watching a coworker lease a new car every 3 years. Watching a neighbor add a pool. Watching friends post vacation photos from places that seem, on a librarian's salary, completely out of reach. Nobody decides, in one dramatic moment, to abandon their financial future. They simply decide, again and again, in small and forgivable ways, to keep pace with the people around them. Over 34 years, her salary nearly tripled, from just under $14,000 to $58,000. The apartment, later the small house, stayed roughly the same. The car was bought used, and used again. Not because she was immune to wanting more, because the harder choice, the upgrade, the bigger loan, the nicer trim package, kept losing, quietly, to a habit she'd stopped noticing. This isn't a story about deprivation. There were vacations, a child raised, holidays, birthdays, a full and ordinary life. It's a story about a gap, the space between what was earned and what was spent, protected, almost without her realizing it, for over 3 decades. That gap is where wealth actually lives, not in the income, in the space beneath it. Then, in 2008, the gap nearly broke. She's in her early 40s. The financial crisis wipes out nearly half the value of retirement accounts across the country, and hers is no exception. She pulls up her statement one evening at the kitchen table and stares at a number that's dropped by tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of months. On the news, a commentator is using the word collapse. A coworker mentions, almost casually, that he's moved everything to cash. Better safe than sorry. She sits with the statement for a long time. It would be easy to do the same. It would feel, in that moment, responsible. 20 years of contributions, and on paper, nearly a fifth of it has simply vanished in a single autumn. She thinks about calling the number on the back of the statement, the one for changing her investments. She even picks up the phone once. She doesn't make the call. Not because she has some special conviction about markets. She isn't sure of anything, sitting at that table. She simply doesn't get around to it, the way she never quite got around to stopping her contributions back in 1999. The paycheck deduction keeps happening, whether she feels brave that week or not. Every 2 weeks, a little more money buys shares in a market that's on sale, whether anyone feels good about it or not. Within a few years, the account hasn't just recovered. It's larger than it was before the crash ever happened. By her 20th year at the library, the account has crossed $200,000. This is usually where a documentary would say the growth took off. In a sense, it did. But nothing had actually changed. The same modest contribution, the same modest fund, the same unremarkable decision made back in 1989. What changed was time. It had finally accumulated enough compounding cycles for the curve to visibly bend upward. Between year 20 and year 30, the account grows by more than it had in the previous 19 years combined. This is the part of compounding that defies intuition. The years that feel the slowest are doing the most important work. A tree's first decade underground, building roots nobody can see, isn't a failure to grow. It's the reason the next 50 years are even possible. There's a quiet, uncomfortable truth hiding underneath this story, and it deserves to be said honestly, without flinching from it. Not everyone starts at 22 with a stable job, a retirement plan, and a coworker offering good advice. Some people are supporting families at 22. Some are paying off debt that isn't their fault. Some don't have access to an employer plan at all, or work multiple jobs just to cover rent. Opportunity, timing, education, health, and circumstance shape every financial story, and this isn't a claim that discipline alone explains every outcome, or that anyone who isn't wealthy simply didn't try hard enough. That kind of thinking ignores decades of evidence about how unevenly opportunity gets distributed. But within the range of choices that were actually available to her, a set of decisions got made that many people, in similar circumstances, could also make, even if the amounts involved are smaller. 3% of $14,000 is a little over $400 a year. Not a large number, and never meant to be one. It only needed to survive. There's a second reason her money grew the way it did, and it has nothing to do with saving at all. It has to do with what it was invested in. No individual stocks were ever picked. No attempt was made to beat the market. Her contributions went, almost by default, into a low-cost fund that simply tracked the broader stock market as a whole. A strategy some call boring investing, because it asks an investor to do almost nothing. In the 1970s, a fund manager proposed this to an industry that found it almost insulting. Instead of paying experts large fees to try to beat the market, why not just buy the whole market at the lowest possible cost and hold it? He was mocked for it, called a strategy for people too unsophisticated to invest properly. Decades of data have since settled the argument. Over multi-decade periods, the overwhelming majority of professional stock pickers fail to outperform the broad market average. Not most amateurs, most professionals, with teams of analysts and years of specialized training. The goal was never to win by being clever. It was to not lose by trying to be clever in the first place. There's an irony worth noticing here. The financial industry, for the most part, profits when people believe investing is complicated. Complexity justifies fees. Complexity keeps people reaching for help instead of trusting a strategy simple enough to describe in one sentence. Buy the market, keep costs low, wait. She never thought of her approach as sophisticated. She thought of it as simple. Simple, it turns out, was the whole point. In the final year before retirement, her supervisor at the library, a man in his 40s, earning nearly twice her salary, asks, almost as a joke, how anyone plans to afford retirement on a librarian's income. She doesn't answer right away. She pulls the retirement statement out of a folder and slides it across the desk. He looks at it, then looks at it again, as if the first read must have been a mistake. Nobody says anything for almost a full minute. Outside the office window, the library is doing what it's done every day for 34 years. A slow afternoon, a few students at the reading tables, the quiet hum of the building she spent most of her adult life inside. He'd spent 2 decades assuming that a bigger salary was the same thing as a bigger future. A nicer title, a nicer car in the parking lot, the unspoken belief that financial security would simply arrive, eventually, as a reward for career success. It wasn't the number itself that landed hardest. It was the realization that the entire time he'd been solving the wrong equation. Income had been optimized. Time had not. She isn't gloating, and she doesn't feel the need to explain herself. There's no dramatic secret to reveal, no clever trick she'd been hiding. She simply did, for 34 years, the same unremarkable thing she'd agreed to on a form in 1989 and let it run. There's a version of this story that ends with a simple lesson: save more, spend less. That's true, but it's incomplete. Financial success gets measured, almost from childhood, by how much a person earns. The salary on the offer letter, the job title at the family gathering. But earning is only the first half of an equation most people never finish. The other half, the half that actually determines the outcome, is what happens to the money after it arrives. Whether it gets redirected before its absence is even felt. Whether it's given enough time to compound quietly, invisibly, for far longer than feels comfortable. Whether it's protected, year after year, from the constant, reasonable-sounding temptations to spend it just a little sooner. Picture two rivers starting from the exact same spring, carrying the exact same amount of water. One is dammed early, filling a reservoir behind it, drop by drop, invisible from the surface. The other flows straight out to sea, spent as quickly as it arrives, admired by everyone who happens to walk past it. For years, the two rivers look identical from the outside. Only one of them still holds water 30 years later. No one in this story ever out-earned anyone. A decision made in 1989, in about 10 minutes, on a $14,000 salary, simply survived, undisturbed, through a decade that felt like nothing, through a crisis that felt like everything, for 34 years. Somewhere, that surgeon and that lawyer are still working, still stressed, still a decade behind a woman who once made $14,000 a year. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack ambition, because they never let anything grow long enough to become large. The real secret was never the income. It was the 34 years nobody was watching.